back here at Experts in the Spotlight Special Edition with our phenomenal guest, Karega Bailey. Karega, we've known each other how long?
It has been just a few months shy of a decade.
Can you imagine? Now, you just told the people you're 27 years old. That means I met you before you were legal.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what were those circumstances? How if I'm not mistaken, it was a 100 black men meeting or something?
You
tell the story.
I'll tell the story just as sharp as it exists in my mind today, and has been, and I'll show you evidence of how impressionable that moment was. I was a scholarship recipient of the 100 Black Men scholarship, and it was the luncheon by which I was receiving my scholarship. And I stepped to the mic, and I watched the tears in my mother's eyes. As often they've been, she's just been such a great supporter. She's been so proud. As I can remember of me her whole life, I always wanted to make sure she was proud because I thought she had the hardest job in the world. And I could not give her anything tangibly yet. So I said that I would not make her job any more difficult. I would make her proud all the days of her life until I'm able to give gifts as well. She was in that audience. I received the scholarship. I was elated. And I remember we pieced together my attire for the evening. And it took quite some time to get my shirt the right size and my necktie and the slacks and the shoes. And we probably went to 5 different stores around the city, price hunting, and me saying, okay, Mom, I like this. At that point, I was presented at my best. I say my speech. I moved some hearts in the audience, one of which I believe was yours, Mr. Jenkins. After my speech, you come to me, you embrace me, you give me a very sharp introduction. It was at that point I knew that I was going to know you. It was a very intentional approach to me. And I received it in body language long before your mouth opened. I did not know that what you wanted to do for me at that moment would change my life for the rest of my life. You tell me a young man who speaks as nice as you tell me this, a young man who speaks as well as you should always be in a suit. I agreed, but I didn't know where we were going with this. I was like, yeah, I would suit. I would agree. After so many gentlemen in the audience were in suits. Didn't have one, couldn't afford one yet. You took me. You asked me my size. I remember like, I think I'm about an extra large. You said, no, son, your suit jacket size. Had not ever answered that question. So not only did you teach me how to answer that question, you showed me what that question meant. Put out a tape measure. One, you gave me an eyeball scale. You said, I think you're about this. Then we went to prove it. You gave me my size. He comes to my house, I imagine the next day or a few short days, he comes to the house on Earhart in Sacramento. My mother's very small duplex that was love rich. Yes to suits. The van pulls up. In this van, you tell me to pick. The ties were fresh and plastic. Shirts were just for me. The suits were incredible. My mother, at that point, nearly lost it. She could not believe that generosity had found her son again. This generosity had followed me my whole entire life. It shaped and it changed my life. And my values and my courage to give and my responsibility to give. Now, responsibility is your ability to respond. And we all have an ability to respond. So many of us choose not to, or we think we don't. But you did. You didn't give me one suit that would wear out. You gave me 2 lasting, very durable quality suits. I wore these suits through undergrad. I wore these suits through grad school. I wore this suit to get the very job I have today. It lasted. And there was a certain pride, there was a certain joy that I got when I put on that suit. I never forgot where that suit came from. And I never forget how ready for the world it made me feel. Because My outermost layer of expression was able to match my innermost value. The suit didn't define me, but it was a social cue to them that I knew what to do when in this room. I knew how to dress to show you that I was competent to your culture. I wore them. I loved them. There's a picture of me speaking at my graduation from Hampton University. It was the graduation, the dinner right before graduation. I was the selected speaker. And that picture, man, must have been on everything. Announcements, profile pics, and I just felt like I looked good and I knew it. Now watch this. When you displayed that generosity and did not have to, and you followed up with me, and you kept in contact with me, and you supported me, and you took me to Toastmasters events, and you taught me the art of conversation, and you invited those who I love to be a part of it. See, one of the greatest things of love is, if you really want to show a young man that you love him, you don't just love him individually. You love him in the context of who he is and where he comes from. So that might include that he has to bring a friend, because of the social influence and how adolescence is shaped around peer identification. You might let him bring a sibling or a friend or a girlfriend, because these shaped his values. You did that, and you continue to do So I would begin to pick up my pen and jot a few things that I thought would be insightful. And up until this point, it was just mostly poetry. My senior year at Hampton University, I ran for the title of Mr. Hampton University. And I was dating at the time a young woman who was a classically trained pianist. She had been playing since she was 5. And for my talent for that competition, we collaborated for the very first time. She played a series of keys that just pulled you in. You could feel the intensity. You could feel the contrast. And I wrote a poem. At the time, it was a reflection piece on what was taking place in Jenner, Louisiana with the Jenner 6. And that was the beginning of my musical career. From the very moment we performed for that first time, I knew we were on to something special.
So you never had any aspirations, like when you were younger, I want to be a poet, I want to be a musician? It just kind of fell on you, like what you're describing?
Well, you got to remember, I grew up to the sounds of reggae and hip-hop, and I had an older brother who was an MC, he was a writer. And I watched him call on the radio stations, and I watched him rap, and so I would begin to do the same thing. And so I executed rhyme to a T. In high school, I was known to be in a recording group, and I rapped, and a local label offered me a deal, but it did not match to what I knew I could accomplish and what would make my surrounding cast most proud. And I left and said, I've got to go get this education. I've been struggling for this thing for a long time. I knew I had to get that education. And there was a poet at the time named Black Ice. He was an HBO deaf poet. And him as a poet changed my tongue as an artist. At 17, I began to understand the injustices and the compromises in the recording industry. And I also realized that from my tongue did not necessarily come the best of who I was at times.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
So, you take the masculinity, the bravado, what cool is defined as wherever you are at that time. And for me, cool at 17 meant that I would say things and perpetually suggest that I was engaging in things that I necessarily wasn't. Or that I may have been intentionally engaging in things that I should not have been, but I spoke on them as points of pride.
Is that what people in my generation call perpetrating?
You might call that perpetrating. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. That is precisely it.
Perpetrating, okay.
I prayed a prayer. I prayed that God changed my tongue. But I did not want to lose my gift. Changed my tongue, but I did not want to lose my gift. All through college, I was only a poet. Only a poet. I knew that I was still writing, and but it wasn't for public presentation yet. My girlfriend at the time, my wife now, Felicia, when we were at Hampton University, a music major she was, she played these keys, and it was just so powerful. And I recited my first poem, Back to the Sound of Rhythm. And I knew we were on our way somewhere. However, from the time I stopped rapping, my senior year in high school, to my second year on the job as a teacher in D.C., I made my first song. It was called Roses. Roses was written to show that I entered in the spectrum of reaching the black male, but I had so many hurt young black women in my presence, in my care. I had to respond. What made this particular song so beautiful was that my wife co-produced the song. It was her and my best friend who you've met, Jonathan Hendry. He was there with us with the 100. And I was at work one day, and I would always try to come home, and Jonathan had a studio in our house this time. And I would try to go in there and record, and the two of them had met up earlier and said they would produce a record for me. Roses was the beginning of this never-ending work as a recording artist, using the art. I believe art touches the heart in ways lectures can't.
Art touches the heart.
In ways that lectures cannot.
Okay.
And I knew it because it was evidenced by how my students would enter school. They had songs in their mind. They were bobbing to something already. And I said, I remember in my day, I knew I was nice already. Like, make no mistake about it. I knew that I had mastered the craft of rhyme. But only God could inspire me with the truth that would come forward with this pen that could change lives. See, rhyming is easy. We learned it with Dr. Seuss. We learned it with alliteration. We learned it in literature. We learned it in writing, in spelling. So the rhyme part was easy, but I mastered it. And I had mastered making you believe that I knew what I was saying. Now, the key would be to have a truth that would deliver you from the reality of hopelessness into this conversation of hope.
It's interesting you bring up truth because I recall one of your posts recently where someone asked you if his performances were age appropriate, like could children be there? What was your response to that person? Elaborate on that.
Interestingly enough, the question was, was my performance going to be age appropriate?
Yes.
And this came from a respected elder. So my perception was either you plan on bringing a child or a grandchild, or you might be bringing a friend who may not like the state of current hip-hop today. Mm-hmm. That I can understand. That I can definitely understand. My response to them, well, at what age is the truth appropriate? See, I do truth music. And it might come to you in the form of hip-hop. It might come to you in the form of something inspired by jazz. It might come to you in the form of reggae and roots and culture. It's going to come to you with some sound, some rhythm delivered to decode all the distractions and pull you in. And needless to say, they said they couldn't wait to come. The truth. It may be painful at times. But I asked someone this. I work with hurt people. Hurt people may say some things that we don't find to be pretty, but it's certainly their hurt truth. Just as a doctor or surgeon sees blood as evidence of his work, I'm going to encounter some language that you may not deem appropriate in my work. But I process that to hear what they're really telling me. Not to judge them and say, there was one student who used profanity in a conversation with me. And had I been blocked by his profanity, I would have missed the chance to change his life. He spoke in a language that he was familiar with. It was my responsibility to decode. And God gave me the insight to hear what he was really saying. He was saying he was scared. He was saying he's not sure if this life is worth living. So in his choice of language, he said, F it. But he wasn't directing that to me. He was saying that I don't think the current state of life is worth me living. So I want to do away with it. That could have been a tragedy. Mm-hmm. Because we know that black men who feel that way are fully capable, and I believe are the ones who take the life of another when their own life means nothing to them. And because I was in the theater of homicide in Southeast D.C. at the time, I could not take him saying that as something he should not have said in front of me. I had to pull him in and say, thank you for sharing. Now let's have this conversation. And that's how my work looks, and that's what it's inspired from. So if it comes from moments of hurt, just as a life is saved in the surgery room where there is blood, this is the work that I'm in. And I've been skilled enough and patient enough to decode these things and find out what they're really saying. I have a student who's on the beginning of this album, Surrender. His name is Troy. He's brilliant. And he's sometimes most scared of his success. And he'll let you know it. Because it creates uncertainty which he has not seen. Now the fact that he survived and come out of a neighborhood where many don't come out of, and he's died so many circumstances, he finds success to be scarier than that. He says, on the beginning of my album, he says, I'm praying God can assure my life, because where I walk, even Allstate can't insure my life. But you want to focus on three things: who you used to be, who you are, and who you want to be. And when he says these things, I'm saying this is a child who is brilliant, who the world must hear from. So I gave him the platform to be on my CD. He later got into some complications in school. And the first person he came to talk to was me. And I knew that I had to create a safe space for him to express himself and give me all of his insecurities so I could use that as a measure to help him, because I did not want expulsion to be brought up as an option.
Well, I am sure you have whet many of our appetites with that comment, and we're looking forward to hearing some of this work. So give us a couple minutes. We'll be right back, and we're going to hear some of this work from Karega Bailey.
Oh, cool. It's going to go right to the...
Okay. So now what we're going to do, we're going to reposition you, and I want you to actually do